Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the following 4 members be appointed to serve with an equal number from the Senate on the Joint Select Committee on Energy Affairs.
Trinidad and Tobago has a parliament which consists of 2 chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. If there are parliamentarians coming together from one of these 2 chambers, then it is a select committee. If you have parliamentarians coming together from the 2 houses, from the 2 chambers, with members of the House and senators, then it is a joint select committee.
Honorable members, the question is that the following 4 members be appointed to serve with an equal number from the Senate on the...
And our role is to scrutinize not only government legislation, but actions of government and actions of agencies of government. We're essentially an oversight body in some cases, where we bring officials in from various departments and question them on their activities and their expenditures.
Committees are the place where the real work has to happen, and where also policies and proposals need to be examined based upon their merits, based upon the content, and not necessarily based upon who is proposing it. I see in a number of parliaments that government proposals are discussed in committees, and in some occasions members of the opposition will support it because they say that's a very good proposal. In other occasions, amendments or alternative proposals from the opposition will be accepted by the ruling MPs because they are good proposals.
When I became chairman of the Public Accounts Committee in 1995, the government of the day had 52 seats in Parliament. The opposition had 8. And I was one of the 8 members of the opposition. We actually promulgated a new law called the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. And the reason for that is that I unearthed a situation in 1999. It was commonly referred to as the public sector salary scandal, where there was great unevenness across many public sector agencies in terms of how they allocated salaries to their senior executives. And because of the stridency of the opposition of the day, the government was obliged to create a new law called the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. That's just an example. I think it's a good example of how an opposition, though small in numbers, must not allow itself to be intimidated into feeling that the majority is so overwhelming that why even bother?
There should be someone put in place to monitor these MP and parliamentarians. One person.
No, not just one person.
Someone should have audit.
It should have because one person. If I don't like you, I could be the one person and say, okay, you should resign. But if it's a group of people, they could come up with, a broader span and weigh the pros and the cons, investigate the situation.
In larger legislatures, just about any piece of legislation that's introduced by government should be scrutinized by a parliamentary committee. So that's an opportunity to examine the bill, call witnesses, and then make recommendations to Parliament. On the oversight side, you can conduct budgetary scrutiny. That is, when the government introduces its budget into the House, you can conduct some type of scrutiny in committee of the whole. That's possible. So that would be sort of basically in the legislature, but with the Speaker not sitting in his chair, essentially.
Honorable Member for Superior.
I thank you very much. I refer to the line items that have been transferred on page 72 from the judiciary to the Ministry of the Attorney General with respect to construction projects.
There's nothing wrong with that, but you're not going to find that as an effective tool when it comes to public accounts committees. That's something where it's almost impossible to have anything but a committee doing that kind of work. So committees are a way of focusing members. You have a smaller group. You've got a chair who's supposed to keep things in line. It's much more focused, and that works very well when it comes to oversight.
The PSC and the PSC are probably the most important committees in the Parliament. They are also, I believe, the oldest in the tradition of the functioning of the institution of Parliament.
The role of the public accounts is to scrutinize the expenditures of government in an after-the-fact way. It's also to take the work and the recommendations of the provincial auditor and to provide the meaningful change, pushing government to implement those recommendations.
Could I ask the Auditor General to come in here? What is the regulation with respect to the engagement of services by a ministry? Are they allowed to just roll over a contract, or should they put it out for tender?
You see, it all depends on the limit. The limit. You're saying about rolling over the contract. For example, this one was 3 million. So suppose they're going again, and it's going to be another 3 million. That is outside the scope, the authority, the financial authority of the permanent secretary.
Understanding what they mean for government and on the whole ensuring that you are working towards ensuring the best possible efficiency and economy and effectiveness of government programs.
The job of the PAC is really an auditing job, because the auditor looks at the expenditure in a fiscal year, does the report at the end, presents it to us. So whatever comes up there is a retrospective view, and corrective action naturally can still be taken despite the retrospective nature of it. But that's the nature of the PAC.
The PAC over the last 5 or 6 years has managed to do something that's very difficult for politicians and institutional structures, and that is to align its work with political interests. So, for example, representatives of Amazon, Yahoo, and Google who have tax mitigation schemes, who run tax mitigation schemes, which mean in effect that they pay very little tax on the revenue they raise in the UK, were brought before PAC, named and shamed, and the result is that some of these organisations are going to pay 20%, 25% tax as from the next budget. PAC will sit twice a week. It has the resources of the National Audit Office, which has a body of 600 auditors and accountants. The National Audit Office is producing reports all the time. These reports are a selection of these reports are taken by PAC and are turned into hearings. And the hearings are very lively, very tough, and people completely hate going in front of PAC because they get really roughed up.
Common prerogatives of a good, well-functioning PAC, you want them to be able to summon documents, and when they summon documents, you want those documents to actually appear. You want the ability to have government officials turn up and testify when summoned. You want the ability to call witnesses and conduct hearings, and you want the committee to be able to request audits when it regards something as being off in the accounts.
Definitely there's a need for research support, and that's something that we find lacking generally in legislatures with functioning PACs. So you need to have a researcher who's independent. They're not part of the caucus, they don't have a political agenda, they work for the clerk's office or for the library, they're independent. And what are they doing? They're providing briefing notes for the PAC prior to the hearing to be able to explain what's going to be discussed at the hearing in a very coherent way that members, let's say they haven't had time to read the report, they've rushed back from their parish, their constituency, they haven't had a chance to look at the report. The researcher has prepared a very brief outline of what's covered in the report. Knowing how to write the committee reports, having the researcher who's available to write the committee reports, conduct benchmarking, comparative research, all those kinds of things. That's one area that I think needs a lot of work.
I also think it's very important symbolically for committee meetings that committee members, they sit randomly, so you don't get blocks of party supporters, and I think that again makes a difference. When committee recommendations are reported, the chair should announce, or should be a press conference or some kind of release in terms of what's the outcome of their inquiry. When they're doing that, it's a very powerful symbol if the committee chair is from one political party, if another member of that committee from a different party is there and they're both portraying the results of that committee. It's those type of almost symbolic ways of doing scrutiny work that can make a big difference, because I think the public get much greater confidence when they see parliamentarians across the political divide coming together and talking about the outcomes of scrutiny work.